This is the March 20th, 2024 Land Use Committee meeting. I'll ask everybody to introduce themselves. I'm the chair, Jay Rosepepe, City Council.
Scott Diener, Council Member 3.
Eric Warden, City Council Member 4.
Nick Bond, Community Development Director.
Jim Fisk, Principal Planner.
Oh, we have a published agenda. Is there anything else that anybody would like to add to the agenda? I'll take that as a no, but if something comes up as a thought, please let me know down the line. We had a packet that was sent to us, and the first item on it was ILA annexation.
Yeah, and I think we discussed this briefly at the end of the last Land Use Committee meeting and asked that we bring this map back for discussion. About 2 years ago, we were in conversations with Kitsap County about using the ILA method of annexation, where basically the county commissioners and the city council can pass an interlocal agreement to enact an annexation. And I wanted to share the map. I know, Eric, you probably haven't seen this previously, but the talk was we're going to put this on hold until we finish the comprehensive plan at the end of 2024, and then potentially resume discussions with Kitsap County at that time. And the areas of annexation, so the map here shows the city boundary in yellow, and the portions of the urban growth area that were proposed for annexation are highlighted in pink, or in the case of this Tracy Avenue little corner, in red. And essentially on the west side of the city, we were picking up a couple of loose ends where there was 1 or 2 parcels or very strange irregular boundaries. I think on Sydney Avenue Southwest here, the road goes for about 200 feet through county right-of-way before re-entering the city. And since then, this storage unit complex has been built, and so that's now complete and online. There's very little development potential here, but it's really about just annexing this little scrap of land that is in our urban growth area. Likewise, on Glenwood Road, it would be about bringing in these 6 or 7 parcels along with a little bit of right-of-way along Glenwood. And this would allow us to have the McCormick Woods Drive, Glenwood Road intersection entirely within the city, because it is likely that there will be improvements to that intersection as the east side of McCormick develops in the future. And, interjurisdictional projects are always much more complex to permit and build. And it's probably easier for the city to just take that on as part of its impact fee program.
And Nick, while you're talking that one, the 4 parcels that are, I would say, above that section, are those already in the city?
They are, yes.
Okay, so yeah, so we're not leaving anybody out.
Yeah, so this is really surrounded on 3 sides by the city, but these properties, for whatever reason, didn't come in previously. So the big portion of the annexation that we were interested in was the Bethel South Corridor. And of course, every time the county does a comprehensive plan update, there's always pressure on what is the UGA boundary going to look like. And so we've had a lot of concerns because the county previously tried to reduce the urban growth area to the south along Bethel. In this current comprehensive plan, the county is actually proposing to take most of this land as commercial, which is more consistent with what the city envisions for the area. But I believe this is still a corridor that the city council at least previously expressed interest in annexing because of the development potential along Bethel south of Sedgwick. And then the final area of annexation is up at the corner of Tracy, kind of just right near the high school. And the reason for this annexation is when the city provides water service to somebody outside of the city, they pay 150% of the city's water rate. So they're basically paying extra because they aren't in the city. And these are the only 4 utility accounts that the city has remaining that it hasn't annexed. And so this is really just, as long as we're doing this ILA method, it benefits these property owners to be in the city because it's going to reduce their water rate by, a third, because they're in the city. And so, where the county commissioners are at, obviously we've got 2 new county commissioners. I think, is it 2 or 1 new county commissioner? I think we have, yeah. So 2 new county commissioners since we last had this discussion. The county commissioner in the South End is still our representative, and her concern was really about public notification. And we really didn't get a lot of traction with her, but I believe that the mayor has had conversations with the other 2 commissioners who said they would be supportive of this. And it sounds like we should try again if the council is interested in this once we complete the comp plan in 2025.
Yeah, a couple of questions, and please jump in, any fellow council members. Since the process has changed to an ILA versus the, as in McCormick Woods area, you know, where we had a certain number of, you know, signatures and, you know, requests for annexation, what is our process going to be for letting the, property owners know that they're, you know, going to be annexed, and do they have an opinion? And the second question is, when we talked about some items, and I realize this isn't going to be till 2025, potentially 2025. The other question is, one area that the city wanted, I mean, the county wanted us to annex, we were certainly not interested in because of the amount of police activity in that area. Have we run this by the chief?
Yeah, so we actually that area was off of Mitchell,
Right.
kind of between Mile Hill on the north and west side of the regional park. And
Right.
so we removed those areas because of that police concern. And also the areas that are proposed for annexation are largely unpopulated. I mean, there is some population here, but we have to be mindful of the trigger in state law where we start taking over responsibility for state highways at a certain population threshold. And so this area really doesn't add a ton of population. It does add some development potential, but no, it doesn't significantly change the population of the city.
Okay, so on the second part of it is, how do we notify people, at least to get, allow them a chance to respond, whether they're even interested in annexation? Obviously, the folks on Tracy, I'd be surprised if they weren't saying, can we do it tomorrow?
Right. So the county and the city, we talked about a joint effort of public outreach where we would send postcards. I think that there has to actually be I'm a little rusty on the law because it's been a year and a half since I've looked
Right.
at it. I think there had to be like a joint hearing between the city council and the county commissioners on this, where both entities had to hear testimony. It may be that each body holds its own hearing, or that it was somehow combined. I don't fully recall, but there would be an opportunity for testimony, and we would do direct mailers to everyone who owns property within in the annexation area.
Just a second, Eric, before I get to you. So if we're not looking at this till 2025, when were you looking at bringing this up to council?
Well, I think that this would be an item for discussion for the council. I mean, you could potentially ask to have this added to the retreat to see if it is something that the full council would like to pursue as part of their work plan next year. But I think, I don't remember what prompted this discussion at our last meeting, but it came up at the last meeting, and I was told to bring the map back.
Okay, why don't, go ahead, Eric, and then I've got a proposal after Scott and Eric weigh in. Eric, go ahead.
How far down Bethel exactly is that? Is it to the Kitsap Airport or down there? How far down is that?
It goes basically to the Bethel overpass over Highway 16. I
Oh,
think there's one little
Mhm.
area here that is east of Bethel, but it stops at Highway 16 here.
Okay. My next question is, and I think I know what I'm talking about here. The county did just repave that. Is there, can you talk about when another jurisdiction does improvements work within a certain amount of time, so many years? Is there a reimbursement for that, or how does that work?
No, not at all. Unless there's
Not
a
at all?
late, I mean, if there was a latecomer agreement, that affects adjacent property owners, not cities. But I mean, the lack of maintenance on these roads is one of the biggest barriers to us doing an annexation. And now that the roads are fixed, it is more appealing to the city to annex because the county has actually caught up with maintenance.
So once the county does the maintenance, then it's more appealing to take it over, correct?
Absolutely.
I mean, as a city, I agree. I mean, I would think differently on the other side. Yeah, I know that I inspect that. I inspect all the commercial on that whole road, so I know it well. But I was wondering how far down, and that sounds about right. So thanks.
Scott, do you have any comments?
Yeah, I think I understand pretty well the presentation, Nick, that you've given. I would encourage a combined hearing for both the board and the council, so that we're not playing a broken telephone game, and also so that residents don't have to attend two separate hearings. It'd be good for everybody to hear the same thing at the same time. And then as to a retreat item, I'm okay if this is put on as a retreat item, but it seems like it's a real low priority when we've considering some of the other issues that we're talking about, which could easily consume most of a day, some of them just by themselves. And again, while this seems like a pretty major effort, I don't know that it really is in terms of hours necessary to do this. The outreach element will probably be the biggest part, but so I'm not terribly keen on the idea of adding this as a retreat item. I would rather look at it after the comp plan and keep it in our hip pocket that this is something we want to do. But that's just my opinion.
Okay, what I was going to do, and Eric, I saw your hand's still raised. What I was going to recommend is that Nick get with the mayor and decide whether they wanted to add a retreat. I agree it's going to be a low-level item, and that if not a retreat, then go ahead and bring it up at a work study item beforehand. That would be I would concur with Scott on that. Eric?
You're
You're on
muted.
there. Okay.
My hand should not be raised. Is it
Okay.
raised?
Yes. Okay, anyway, I'll look at your physical hand from now on. Anyway,
I got it.
Are you good enough with that? We let.
Yeah, that works, and I'll talk to the mayor when he returns. And I think putting it on a work study agenda maybe later in 2024 or early 2025 probably makes sense. Obviously, it's a budget year, so we're going to have some pretty full meetings this fall with both comp plan and budget. So I'm guessing January of 2025 is when we should pick this up.
Okay, sounds like a plan. No pun intended. Next subject, if we're done with that, is bungalow restaurants.
I'll just kick off the intro to this. This was an article, or this began with an article that was sent to me by Fred. And looking through it, it seems pretty intriguing. And it also seems kind of adaptive to a different way of doing business that we're trying to encourage in many places. I find it intriguing, but I don't know necessarily if we have any neighborhoods that are ripe for this kind of development. But nonetheless, I thought I would kick it out. The right neighborhood would do well with this. There are obviously issues that we've got to be aware of. Parking. We don't want necessarily, well, we can't avoid what health has to say about it as well. And then, there's the whole issue of creating a to-go situation where now you've got more traffic queuing up in front of a bungalow or something like that. So anyways, a neat idea, perhaps something to talk about in a future comp plan update if people are warm to the idea. But Nick, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, I would just say that we already allow this because we created a building type called a mixed-use shopfront house, or it's a shopfront house. And so several of our commercial mixed-use zones, which include neighborhood residential and our, what's the other mixed-use residential for neighborhoods, Jim? I forget the name of it.
It's neighborhood mixed use and residential mixed use.
Okay, yeah. So we have two mixed use zones that allow for this sort of thing. And actually, when we start talking about the zoning map on item 4 on the agenda, you'll see that there is some proposed rezoning around Gibbons Park to allow for this sort of thing. So existing houses in that area could potentially develop as a shopfront house or be converted to a shopfront house. I think the big challenge is meeting building codes and obviously putting in commercial cooking equipment.
Yep.
I actually live 5 doors down from a house like this that has a restaurant in the Victorian house, and they have a yoga studio on the first floor and Italian restaurant on the second floor. So it seems to work really well, and it's pretty common in older neighborhoods. It's a lot harder to pull off, I think, in newer neighborhoods and newer construction. So I think in the residential mixed use and neighborhood mixed use zones, we already essentially allow for this. It's really somebody has to find the right structure and choose to make that sort of investment.
Okay. So a question I would have on this is actually, and I've actually seen this in practice in California, is really somebody would have to come to us with a proposal right now, because as you pointed out, we do allow it, from that aspect.
Yeah,
Correct.
it's
Yes.
possible they might not have the right zoning and they would have to seek a rezone or a comprehensive plan amendment to change the zoning. But I mean, one particular building I can think of is the bed and breakfast over on Kitsap, or off of Kitsap Street, where that is a kind of a large historic home, but that's the type of structure where you can do this sort of thing if you have the right zoning in place. And so we have the tool in the toolbox. Whether it's on the map in the right place or not is another question, but people can certainly pursue zoning changes for their property that would allow this to happen.
Eric or Scott? Go ahead, Scott.
Go ahead, Eric.
Nope.
My question is, are there other zones where this could be broadened a little bit, where those zones could be broadened a little bit to allow something like this, or would it just not fit in the character of neighborhoods to try to do this? I realize that some of these neighborhoods are newer and that presents more challenges.
I think you're really looking at houses that are probably pre-1930 for this sort of thing to fly. I mean, there might be some if you had a newer house that was, architecturally designed with higher ceilings and other features that would make this viable, maybe it's possible. But I think just most houses built since 1930 probably don't have the dimensional characteristics to make this sort of thing work.
Okay.
Certainly
right.
agree. It's kind of a niche market then.
Yeah.
Eric, go ahead, Eric.
I think his hand's still stuck.
Okay.
It is. I've pushed the thing a million times, so
Okay.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
Okay.
I was just going to show you guys. This is one of these by near where I live, and the yoga studio goes in the front door, and then there's a restaurant on the second floor.
Right.
This is the side, but this is a 1920s house with high ceilings and lots of windows, and they've somehow put a commercial kitchen on the second floor. But where you have the right existing structure, it can work really well. But again, new buildings, it's pretty challenging.
Yeah.
All right.
So so the apartment complex by Sedgwick and Sydney, they have the lower units. Those are like the workspace residential type.
Yeah, live work. Yep.
I know that's commercial versus residential, but is that kind of what you're talking about a little bit? If it was
That's sort of a similar concept, except that that's in an apartment building as opposed to being a freestanding house.
Yes,
And those, while those meet commercial building code for a Class B occupancy, they are not set up for cooking, or, I mean, it would be really hard to retrofit one of those spaces to be a restaurant versus being some lower impact commercial use like a salon or insurance agent or something like that.
more like counseling or something like that.
Exactly.
Services.
All right.
All right. I think that there's no action to be taken or anything to move up to the council on this one. I think that somebody would have to basically come to the city and say, this is what we'd like to do, and ask for any zoning changes or do an application. 2024 comp plan.
And just to put a bow around the last issue, I'll reach out to Fred and inform him.
Thank you.
Yeah, let them know I got the article. It's, it's intriguing, but it's, it's again, somebody else has to do the work.
Right, Jim, you gonna tackle the comprehensive plan?
Sure. So similar to last month, we've included some draft elements in your packet for your comments. It includes parks, natural systems, and transportation. So hopefully you all have some time to review it. We'd like comments by the end of the month. We're getting really tight on our timelines to meet that June deadline for deliverables, but obviously we would like your input. Parks and Natural Systems, they had a pretty light touch. I think you'll see that transportation was a bit more significant, and our consultant is actively working on that. We introduced these to the Planning Commission on March 5th. Didn't get a whole lot of feedback from them at that time, but we also had a policy workshop on the 28th, and it was pretty well attended. I think in comparison to our open house at the beginning of 2023, it was very well attended. So got a lot of input through Social Pinpoint, and you can still provide comments through Social Pinpoint. That comment period is going to be open through this Sunday. So if you get a chance, you could do that. Land use workshop, we have a tentative date, 4/25, which is Thursday, 25th of April. And right now we're working on the climate, housing, land use, and capital facilities elements. A lot of work being done there. But that's essentially it. So these are the three elements that we'd like your comments on. And obviously we're taking each of these elements to the various subcommittees. You are all seeing them, all of the elements. And I think last week we did utilities at Utility Committee.
Right.
Economic development. So it's still the same. We're going through the same process. So many of you will have many opportunities to comment on each one of these elements.
I was going to ask if before we started out that, possibly if Nick, if you could have, the mayor when he gets back or somebody, or even since you're looking for comments by the 31st, send out another message to council saying, hey, these are open, please. We need your comments back by March 31st. I've waded through some of it. I still have more to go.
All right.
Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah. Jim, let's make note of sending out an email. And I wanted to add, we had a separate meeting today with our consultant because we're working on the capital facilities element. And it became apparent from some of our recent council discussions. I really want to emphasize to the full council, but since I have the three of you here, that the online engagement for our policy discussion right now is live. And so this is the time to really weigh in on the actual policies that are in the comprehensive plan. You'll get a second touch at these in September, but by the time September rolls around, the cake is going to be pretty well fully baked, and it's hard to make significant changes that late in the process. So it's really imperative that if you have concerns about the direction that things are going, or have real issues that you would like to see added to the comprehensive plan, this is really the forum for doing that, is this online policy outreach process that we're doing right now.
Scott?
So we'll send a reminder on that as well, separately from sending the draft documents to the full city council.
Okay. And then Social Pinpoint, the access to that is on the comp plan webpage, or will you send that around as well?
We can do both.
Nick?
Yes, it is on the comp plan webpage, and I'm going to pull it up right now, and I will show you what this looks like.
That'd be great.
So when you go to the city's 2024 comprehensive plan update, this is from the DCD, or the community development page. When you scroll down to the Social Pinpoint link here, and hopefully I'm following the correct path here, Jim, you're going to be able to click on each of the elements, and there is basically a listing of every goal and policy in the element, where you have the ability to say, how are we doing on this particular goal? You can read the policies associated with each of the goals and then provide written feedback. And so you can select which of these you want to comment on, but this is really the place to say, hey, I really don't like this policy, or I think we need to go in a different direction on the particular policy. So this is a time-consuming thing to go through. There's a lot of goals and policies in the plan, but this kind of breaks it up into bite-sized pieces where you can go through element by element, look at the overarching goal and the associated policies kind of as just the language, and provide feedback and say, I don't like this, or I think there is something else we need to be doing to achieve this goal.
So it looks like you provide a poor, neutral, or great rating on the goal itself, and then you provide comments on the policy or the goal as
Correct.
well in the feedback box.
Correct. And it's structured so that each goal has accompanying policies. And so
Right.
that's kind of the metric that we're using, is rate how we're doing on the goal, and then give us feedback on the goal and policy combined.
Okay. What about text to the comp plan? Changes to that. I saw that there was some notes provided in the draft that we got with our packet. I didn't recognize the initials necessarily.
Yeah, so those are the working drafts that we have from our consultants. Transportation, especially, Jim said we had a lighter touch on natural systems and parks. Transportation is a heavier touch, and we're not done. There are certain sections that we are still working to release. So that's kind of where things stand now. But some of the comments are from the consultant indicating that, how does the Planning Commission feel about this issue, or noting we still need to update this figure or this graphic. There's more to come, but it's kind of, this is where we are at in the update process in terms of a working document.
Okay. I'll pause there. I do have some comments on the plan itself, but I'll pause there for others.
Go ahead, Scott. You're on a roll.
Okay, one of the things I'd like to see mentioned in the Parks and Recreation element is that we need to do an FTE analysis. And my question for you, Nick, is there a model for FTE analysis for parks and recreation facilities, indoor and outdoor? I'm sure there must be. Like if you've got, 100,000 square feet of parks surfacing, grass surfaces, for example, that requires 2 FTEs typically. If we could look at that kind of a FTE analysis, or at least represent in the comp plan that that's something we're going to be looking at, I think that would give people a better comfort level with moving forward with ultimately what is needed, Parks Department.
Sure. And that levels of service are typically discussed in both the system plan, but also the capital facilities element. And so we had this very conversation today concerning both public works operations, where parks comes from, and police today in terms of how this is going to be worded. And I think there's been a lot of discussion on kind of doing this operational analysis. And one of the goals is for us to actually do the analysis to figure out what those numbers are. And we're trying to do it in a way that it is a goal for the city to do this, but we also aren't going to set such a rigid level that it becomes like a union contract negotiation type issue. So I think that's kind of the discussion that we're having right now, is how do we take that next step in determining appropriate staffing in these areas without I guess binding us to doing something that we can't necessarily afford to do.
Go ahead.
Scott, yeah, Scott, that's a really good question. As you're asking it, I was like, that's a good question, because I was brainstorming that last night after we left. So thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I think many of us feel the momentum for a parks, at minimum, an increased parks presence, but a Parks Department. And I don't know if you've if the mayor shared with you everybody's retreat items so far, but one of mine was that we have a high, medium, low forecasting of parks fees over a period of time, and see when that informs on a reasonable creation date for a Parks and Recreation Department. You're muted again, Nick.
What do you mean parks fees? Because the only dedicated parks revenue is impact fees, which can't be used for operations. So,
Oh, okay, that's an important distinction I had forgotten. Yeah.
No, the
But-
mayor had talked about that at one of our past, bring you up to speed on this, Eric, that in order to have a Parks Department and separate besides what I would consider our seasonal and what we do, that we would need to basically put something before the voters. And that's, we don't have a Parks Department now for that
Well,
reason.
so I think what the mayor was talking about there was a Metropolitan Parks District, which I think might be a tough sell in our area. It was
I think that was one of the options, but he was also just talking about a parks levy to support parks operations for a period of time. And then
Right.
that's something that would then come up for renewal. Do we want to renew the parks levy and keep this, this parks department, which presumably includes both programming as well as a separate operations department? And I think a more intermediate step is just simply having dedicated park staff within the public works operations side of things. You don't necessarily have to create the full department. You could simply just say, we need three FTEs in parks
Yeah.
maintenance just to maintain
Yeah.
our facilities. And so, those are things you can absolutely include in the comprehensive plan. But it definitely requires more discussion with the full council.
Yeah, and I'd like to just add that we need to be very careful about floating a levy, because as we know, this area is very levy, bonds, fees, taxes averse. And if we try and float a levy and it's voted down, then we're put into an even more difficult position if we try and expand our role in Parks and Recreation. So I'd like to look at, what can we do short of going out to the voters and asking for them to weigh in on a levy, which hasn't done well.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, Nick, a two councils ago, you gave the presentation and future projects, things that are coming. One of them was, we discussed the pickleball courts in McCormick that the McCormick land developer was going to build and the city of Port Orchard was going to maintain. Remember that?
Yep. Yes, I do.
All right. Was that just a discussion point that you talked about, or
No, we have a binding contract. So we entered into an agreement because the McCormick master plan, when it was created and when the county approved these plats years ago, they included parks mitigation. When the city annexed that, we assumed the county's role in these agreements, and then we renegotiated them because they didn't really work for the city in the way that the county, what the county had envisioned for itself and how the city operates are very different. So we renegotiated, and essentially when we raised park impact fees in 2022, we increased park impact fees from under $1,000 per unit up to like $5,000 or $6,000 per house, and that was to pay for building additional parks in the city. And under impact fee law, if a developer builds a park that is part of our parks program, we have to then give them impact fee credits and basically reduce the amount that they pay. So every house that gets built in McCormick Woods gets a reduction on their impact fees of about $2,000 per unit from the $6,000. So they're still paying a net increase of $4,000 that can go to other parks. And then they're agreeing to build these 3 projects for the city, which then get dedicated publicly and are available for all of the citizens of Port Orchard to use. So we have a contract in place right now that McCormick is agreeing to build these for the city, and the city will accept ownership. And in exchange, we've already started giving them credits towards their impact fees based on the property dedication that they had made years ago, which we still owed them money for. And then we're giving them further credit as they complete each of these tasks. So they actually, the 3 projects are McCormick Village, phase 3. And then there's 2 pedestrian pathways that loop through McCormick West that are like grade separated pathways. And so one of those is complete, and they've just submitted a certified construction cost to kind of extend their park impact fee credit and get recognition for the improvement that they made, which is basically from the new roundabout all the way through the portions of McCormick West that have been built. And then that will eventually become a big loop trail with the second phase of the pathway, and that makes up the third project.
Okay, so we are obligated to, this is going to happen because we're obligated to accept the park, correct? There's no way around it.
Correct. We have a contract where we gave credit in exchange for them building this park.
I'm just concerned about it. And that's not because I live here, but I just don't think we have the staffing to maintain the park and maintain, well, I know we don't have the staffing to maintain the parks that we currently have, let alone adding more to it. But that's a conversation that we can have at the retreat about parks.
Absolutely.
So Scott, before I get to your hand up, would you just, something else for Eric is we don't take on all of the development's parks.
No, true.
Okay, so I mean, it's only the ones that we have agreements with, like the ones in McCormick, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Nick, there was we had some negotiations with them because they wanted us to take over additional, and we said no to that. The county has also wanted us to take over Retzel Park, and we've said no to that. A lot has to do with, as you pointed out, staffing, right now. So I think
And that park's in terrible shape. It needs to be rehabbed before we would ever.
Well, no, I'm using it as, that was a past one, that came up a couple of, years ago when we had the campers there, that were there. But,
But we do
Yeah.
have,
but
Yeah,
as
we do have
far
to
as
have
the
great
staffing
balance.
goes, that's kind of a separate discussion right now,
Yeah.
from the land use. Go ahead, Scott.
I just wanted to comment that Retzel has great bones for a future athletic annex of some sort. I mean, look at what Pendergast has been able to do with their facilities and parks around it. I think at some point we should seriously consider, I don't think we're anywhere near that, acquiring that, but that's a whole other issue. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that, there was, I haven't looked at the survey in a little while, but I recall that there was some brick and mortar, priorities, like a Boys and Girls Club facility or something like that, where people had prioritized that. And I didn't catch that in my quick read. Maybe I just need to go back and look again, but I didn't see that mentioned. As I saw some of the other priorities, but not necessarily that.
So the plan is going to mention, it's going to reference the parks plan. And so the pros plan is adopted by reference into the comprehensive plan. And I
Yeah.
think there's a lot more on that in the pros plan. And so one of the things that's changing in this iteration of the comp plan is we're moving the project tables all to the capital facilities element. And we're really focusing on near-term projects, the 6-year CIP more so than the 20-year. For the 20-year projects, you have to go to the system plan and dig a little bit deeper to get to those. And then every 2 years, the idea is that we update the capital facilities element to bring new projects onto the list and to remove the projects that we have completed. And it's more, that becomes more of a living element that we update with more regularity than we have historically as we're becoming a grown-up city.
Okay, I'll look at that section again with that perspective in mind.
All right, and for Councilmember Warden's benefit, I wanted to mention one other thing. The parks impact fees that we collect are based on our project list of things that we're going to build that are in the Parks and Recreation Plan. And so we are collecting this money, and under state law, we are required to spend this on capital park improvements, which add capacity to parks. So the $6,000 per house that we collect means that within 10 years, we have to spend that money on projects that expand our park system. And so the park system, we've essentially made commitments by adopting park impact fees that this system is going to expand, as are the maintenance responsibilities. And it's going to be up to the city council as things grow to figure out how to allocate those new general fund revenues, which includes expanding park maintenance for those facilities. But right now, if the council's intent was not to add park facilities, you would want to get rid of park impact fees because there's a ticking clock on that revenue that we have to spend it on new parks within 10 years. And right now, all of our revenue for the next 6 years is already obligated to the Community Event Center, the Downtown Plaza, the Givens Field project, and a handful of others. We were just talking about this earlier today. But beyond 6 years, we're going to have revenue coming in for additional parks that are identified in the parks plan, and we're going to have to choose which one of those is the next park to go forward.
Yeah. So just to clarify, because I think there might be some confusion, I'm a huge fan of parks, and I want as much green space and parks and outdoor activities as we can provide. I just want the maintenance for them. That's what I'm worried about. So
Well,
Yeah, I agree that we are under maintaining the parks, and that's something that has to be part of that every 2-year budget discussion. And certainly with the addition of the McCormick Village Phase 3, that's even more reason that we need to look at adding FTEs that are dedicated to parks.
yes. So
I think that's a discussion within council, and with the mayor as we start discussing FTEs and general fund.
Absolutely. I'm gonna step aside real fast and grab a phone charger. So carry on. I can hear you.
Anything else, Scott? On this item?
Yeah, just further on in the plan, and then I didn't get through, I got sidetracked when I was trying to finish my review, but on page 56, 8.3.2.1, you don't necessarily need to go there, but that's the page that covers a lot of detailed information about Kitsap Transit and their service, their routes and their times. And I understand what we're trying to show here, but it also obligates us to making a comp plan change every time there's a change in their schedule. And I don't know that we necessarily want to do that if we can avoid it. So that's one comment. And then on page 58, and I'm going to go to that page. There is discussion about long-range transit planning, and it mentions the Port Orchard Transit Center in one of the bullets, as well as the expanded Port Orchard Transit Center. And I want to be very careful about how we talk about the transit center, because I don't think that there's universal support. In fact, there might be universal opposition to putting a transit center by the council, opposition by the council, to putting a transit center in where the library is. I think a lot of us were taken by surprise when we saw the presentation that had it, and some of the alternatives that were set aside. Nobody had looked at that. And so I feel like, I don't want to speak for council, but I feel like many would agree that we've got to talk about where we want Kitsap Transit. And Eric's been pretty good to follow this and advise that perhaps the Port of Bremerton is looking at buying Penn Feed and turning that into a structured parking, which I think could work if they communicated with Kitsap Transit and they tried to make that a joint use structure, maybe with an anchor tenant being Kitsap Transit on top. I don't know, but I feel like we need to have more of a strategic discussion about Kitsap Transit and their intentions. And now it sounds like the port's intentions, and this could move faster than any of us know. And because all it takes is somebody signing a check to Penn Feed. So I just want to be careful about how we represent a transit center's future in downtown Port Orchard. Again, I don't think there's support to have it be on our waterfront. I currently call our waterfront the best waterfront parking there is. I don't want to have the best waterfront transit center there is. Our waterfront is too valuable for that. So that's my 2 cents on that.
What was the page
and
number again there?
That is page 58.
8-58?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, sorry, page 58 of the packet. It
Okay.
is page 8-12.
Got it. Okay.
So anyways, part of the discussion that Eric was able to ferret out about Port of Bremerton is brand new, certainly to me. But I think we should be very aware of the need for coordination between 2 or 3 parties here. It sounds like 3.
Yeah, that came from Doug, the owner of Peninsula Feed. So, yeah.
And I would caution us from realizing that the library is not moving in 5 years, 4 to 5 years, that there's a lot still coming down the road. I don't want to either speak for Kitsap Transit or speak for the city right now until we have more information, because I can see both positions right now, having previously been on the Kitsap Transit Board. And by the way, we do get another position on the board coming up, that that there's a lot more to it. And I agree, Scott, that we got kind of blindsided with that pitch. But again, I will say, not in their defense, that it was it was conceptual in nature. So that's my 2 cents.
Okay.
Anything else on the comp plan?
I wasn't able to get any further.
Okay, Eric, any more to weigh in or move on?
Move on, please.
Okay, a couple of items I wrote down when we were talking. You had one, you said you wanted to add an item, Nick, on zoning.
Yeah, I think Jim sent out a revised packet.
Then I
included
missed
this
that. I
map.
apologize. Go
So
ahead.
I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen and I'll pull this up for you. I'm gonna start in the McCormick area. So as part of the 2024 comprehensive plan update, we are thinking a step ahead to the implementation of House Bill 1112. Is that the correct number, Jim? 1110. That's it. Yeah, 1110 is a House bill that was passed recently dealing with middle housing. And for Port Orchard, the state legislature has essentially mandated that in all neighborhoods that are predominantly single family, you have to allow for middle housing types, which include duplex, triplex, fourplex, townhomes, sixplex. There's a menu you have to choose from. And I think we have to pick 4 or 6 housing types off of that menu and make sure that our zoning allows these things. There is, however, an exemption that any land that is encumbered by critical areas is not required to comply with this House bill. And so, as I've been thinking, and the deadline for implementing House Bill 1110 is June 30th of 2025, so 6 months after we finish our comprehensive plan. But in anticipation of that, I'm thinking about our land use map and what it looks like relative to what it's going to need to do under House Bill 1110, and I'm sort of preemptively proposing some shifts in zoning from what our current zoning framework looks like. And the big shift is that we currently have an R1 and an R2 zone that for the most part R1 does not comply with House Bill 1110 and R2 does comply with House Bill 1110, but it probably needs a few tweaks to it. And so what the planning staff and I have done is we've gone through a mapping exercise to look at critical areas and their buffers relative to our single family zones to figure out which zones are predominantly single family and which ones are going to be required to allow everything that R2 allows and which ones do not. And so going forward in 2025, the intent is that R1 will be a zone that allows for single family homes, but typically is going to be exempt from House Bill 1110, and R2 is going to be the low density zone that complies with House Bill 1110. What that means is that we've basically gone through our zoning and identified the brighter yellow that you see in McCormick West and the undeveloped part of McCormick Woods is R2, and the lighter yellow is R1. And I know that McCormick already has covenants as part of the HOA that prevent this sort of thing from happening, which the law recognizes those and says any HOA that's adopted these rules prior to HB 1110 does not have to comply, even though the city still may have to provide the zoning that complies. Fortunately, in McCormick, I guess fortunately, depending on your persuasion, in McCormick, the entire area is an aquifer recharge area. And so it is identified as a critical area that does not have to comply. And most of this area, I believe, is currently zoned R2, and our R2, we are proposing to actually make it part of the R1 zone going forward because we don't see a whole lot of redevelopment happening in the older legacy lots of McCormick Woods along the golf course and where there's these aquifer areas, for no other reason that the HOA doesn't allow it, but also we just think it is very unlikely to happen. We went through a mapping exercise throughout all of the city and basically identified and changed anything that was currently R1 that needs to be R2 under the new law is now R2, and anything that has these critical area encumbrances that also maybe has infrastructure complaints or constraints or other reasons to stay at R1, we have left those R1, or in some cases even changed things that were R2 to be R1, and I'll give you a few examples of those. The other big change in McCormick Woods is that all of the HOA-owned open spaces have currently been zoned for residential development, even though they're recorded as open space. And so we are changing on the map all of the new green that you see. This is all currently yellow. And this really highlights which properties are either the active portion of the golf course or HOA-owned open space and would take those out of any potential calculation for residential capacity or the need to plan for infrastructure. So there's a whole lot more green on the map in McCormick Woods especially, but also in a few other areas of the city. The large stormwater park that we acquired on Sherman for regional stormwater facilities and also a park. And out towards Ross Point, I believe Greenbelt has also been expanded. I mentioned some areas that are currently R2 that we're proposing to make R1, and those are mostly off of Melcher and Pottery, kind of in the northeast corner or northwest corner of the old part of the city. All of these areas have privately owned stormwater ponds that would require HOA approval if you're going to add impervious surfaces in the subdivision. And all of these ponds were designed under old manuals that require a stormwater pond that's about 1/10 of the size of what is required today. And so we felt that these areas, because of the presence of critical area buffers, steep slopes, aquifer recharge areas, that everything from Casco Lane down off of Bay Street up to this subdivision off of Tremont here at the first roundabout that you come to, all of these areas really ought to stay R1 because it's highly unlikely that they're going to have any infill development in the middle housing arena. And so that's a significant change that we have proposed going forward. The other thing that has changed, and I'm going to zoom in a little further around, I mentioned Givens Park, and I told it to zoom in, but it doesn't seem to want to zoom. But in the blocks immediately adjacent to Givens Park, we're proposing some neighborhood or residential mixed use consistent with the recommendations of the Housing Action Plan. And this is where that restaurant concept that you talked about would be possible, but also some of the older houses that are there, because it fronts on a park, which is kind of an amenity. You could have townhomes replace houses and have that park-oriented development that was talked about in the Housing Action Plan. This also extends down Klein from Dwight to Kendall. And I don't think we've changed anything on Sydney, but there is also some of this zoning along Sydney across from the county campus. So that's another change that is proposed. And then finally, the development company associated with the Suquamish tribe has recently purchased all of the property at the end of Bravo Terrace at the kind of Geiger dead ends here. It's these
Oh, wow.
4 or 5 large parcels. And they only do commercial development. They do not do residential. And currently this is zoned residential in our plan. And so they've applied to the Department of the Interior to have the property recognized as federal tribal land, which means we don't have any control over what happens there anyway. But the thought is that we should zone this commercial heavy because it reflects what is likely to happen when the tribe develops. And so at least some of our development assumptions will be more in line with what is likely to happen on that property. And we're sharing this. This is the first time we've shared this publicly, but we are planning a mailing to every property owner who has a proposed zoning change. And we've also created a website that kind of explains what's happening with House Bill 1110 and why some people are going from R1 to R2 and why some people are going from R2 to R1 and just kind of giving that background. And we wanted to introduce this to you so that you were aware of it well in advance of introducing it to the Planning Commission later next month.
Yeah, you answered one of my questions, because I had a question about what was the impact on the legislative session for the missing middle and how would it affect areas with HOAs. So that basically there's a grandfather part to that one. But and I think the outreach is something that everybody would be looking forward to for that side. I would like you to bring this to council, even informational at a work study, just to update everybody. Scott, you were saying something.
I was very interested in the last discussion item. Is that Port Madison Enterprises? Did you say Suquamish Tribe?
Yeah, Port Madison Enterprises just
Okay.
bought, I think it's nearly 60 or 80 acres off at the end of Geiger.
And do we know that they're not branching out into residential, or did they say specifically they were interested in commercial development?
I spoke to the attorney representing them. He called and just wanted to let me know to expect this letter from the Department of the Interior. And I asked him about what their plans are, and he said, well, he basically said, we only do commercial development. We are not in the residential business. So
Okay.
it's, you know, what I don't know what that looks like. I mean, I'm sure they would partner with other entities and look at developing this commercially, and none of our zoning applies. The nice thing about it is we still get, the city gets its share of sales tax revenue from tribal land within the city limits. The state does not get their portion of the sales tax. the other thing that comes with this is the tribe gets a portion of the state gas tax. And so they indicated that if this develops, they're going to have money to actually make some of the transportation improvements on Sedgwick that would be needed to serve this sort of development. And so, you know, we lose
that was my
property
next
tax,
question, yeah.
we keep the sales tax. They would have to, you know, we're the water sewer provider here, so they would have to work with us on water and sewer and pay our rates and our fees for water and sewer, but they don't have to pay traffic impact fees. They don't have to pay park impact fees if they were to do residential development. So there's some good, some bad, but it's also probably very streamlined in terms of what they can do and how quickly they can do it.
Now, they would have to comport with traffic impact analysis and resultant change in transportation patterns, right?
I did not get that impression from them, unless
Okay.
perhaps it's through NEPA if they're subject to NEPA. But this is the first time I've ever dealt with a tribal entity buying property in a city. So I'm in uncharted territory here.
Yeah, and I am too. I'm familiar with Moore County, where for the casino way up north by Hansville, I can't remember, Lighthouse, what's it called?
Hmm.
Anyways, they had to do road improvements as a result of that proposed development at the time. So I believe it's been standard that they don't get a pass on TIA.
Well, and it's possible that because it's a state highway, there may be something associated with, and this is a state highway at Sedgwick, so there may be some leverage from the state that the city doesn't have, but I really don't know enough about it yet to really have a full grasp on how it would work.
Well, it would be great if the state and the tribe could coordinate on traffic improvements in that area, like we've talked about moving the on-ramp to 16 North, you know, moving that further away from its current location and so on. But how long will it take for the DOI letter to come?
Oh, we've received it.
Oh, you have?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
We were notified that it's under consideration. I don't know that it's been approved yet, but we did get notice that the application has been
Okay,
made.
I was thinking about when we get an approval letter.
And
Okay.
Chris Hammer has his hand up.
Oh, I was just going to add, I'm still up, I'm playing catch up on all this as well as the rest of you. And one idea that's come up on discussions with staff between planning and engineering staff is we do have that 2018 study that identifies the new intersection improvements on Sedgwick. And it might be good to formalize that in the road network here.
It is formalized in the road network already. And I also sent that study to the tribe because the attorney was calling me and he was asking about access. And I said, well, you should be aware that we have this study. We coordinated with WashDOT on it. And this is where access is proposed. I was kind of hoping that I would steer him in the direction of buying some of the property that's needed to make that road connection from Sedgwick. But anyway, they're aware that the corridor plan is in place.
All right.
Okay. And then one more, I was wondering, we have designations for arterials and collectors and local access. And one thing that I failed to include earlier was it might be a good idea with the states doing work on in the Gorst area on the state route there. And we have Anderson Hill, and we've got that roundabout we're trying to build there. That might be a candidate for a collector street, which would make it eligible for federal dollars. So I don't know if that's one we'd want to consider modifying this time around, but just throwing that out there. I'm going to have that discussion with the transportation committee next week.
Okay, great.
Eric?
Yeah, I just want to say I just learned a lot, and that's really cool. That's a lot of work you guys did, and I learned it pretty quick. So I'm kind of taking it all in, but it's a lot of work. So thanks for doing all that, and I like being on these committees like this because I'm really fascinated and interested in this stuff, and it's really it's a lot. So I'm taking it in, not asking a lot of questions. I'm more kind of learning. So I apologize for that.
It's a fire hose, buddy.
And I will,
it's a fire hose. That's true.
yeah, I will second Eric's commendation of DCD. You guys have done a lot of work behind the scenes. I'm impressed too.
Yeah.
So I wanted to just share one more thing about the map. Generally, where you know, we had situations in some of these subdivisions in McCormick North and also over in Parcel D, the Eldon Trails subdivision, where some of the lots could have been R1 and some of them were R2. But with any subdivision where some of the lots were R2, we wanted to keep the subdivision zoning consistent. So we just said, you know, the northern half of Eldon Trails is all R2. And once you were in the Ridge and Channing Circle and McCormick Meadows and the new areas of McCormick Village, some of the lots could have gone R1 and others would have been R2. We just tried to keep the zoning consistent within each neighborhood as much as possible, rather than having a patchwork of zoning. So where some of the properties had to be R2, all of them are R2, even though some of these properties are within critical area buffers, was kind of the decision we made. We didn't want to have that patchwork zoning map.
And that was driven by wanting to keep some consistency and character of development.
Yeah, it's the character of development, but it's also just ease of getting information to people. And
Yeah,
you know, when you're looking at a zoning map, I mean, if you're on the interactive map, you can click on the parcel and verify the address. But I think there would be situations where you're trying to count how many lots down you are from a street. And, you know, if the color changes from light yellow to dark yellow, it becomes difficult to communicate the information to people.
Eric, you have your hand up.
Oh, no, it's just this.
Okay, I'll
It's
look at
saying-
your, I'll check your physical
yeah,
hand.
my hand. I will add that, like you said, Jay, about it's drinking it through a fire hose. But I've made a practice of going back and watching, you know, the videos over again, and it's helpful. So yeah.
One other note about McCormick too, the golf course. I reached out to them because I was concerned that the golf course was actually zoned for residential development, and I thought, if some private equity company were to acquire the golf course, would they try to develop housing where there are currently fairways and where people have golf course frontage lots? And so I talked to them, and they were totally agreeable to changing the 18-hole golf course to Parks and Recreation as a zone. They did, however, want to insist that the clubhouse area and the driving range remain as residential. And I think that's because they have that gravel parking lot off to the side of the clubhouse. And so they really don't know what the future is, but they didn't want to be committed to park and recreation only uses in those areas. And so you will see that the golf course is mostly green, but in the clubhouse area and the driving range area, it is staying R2. And then in McCormick West, the recorded subdivisions are R1, but the remaining parcels are R2. As these get recorded, I would expect us to update the zoning map so that this is all R1, and then as open space gets dedicated, it will go to Parks and Recreation. But we don't have final lot layouts yet that we can actually do that level of zoning on this map. So just beware that will likely mostly end up being R1 in the future with Parks and Recreation.
So, quick question on this is then the tie-in with utilities. Because if we were getting a smattering of people wanting to do ADUs, middle housing, etc., you know, we could, if it was in a large area, we could end up with some utility issues in the sewer electrical. Is there a, I hate to say, out on that one, or you know, from designation, or is it we cross that bridge as people apply?
So you can get more time to do planning if you have utility shortages. You can't get out of it altogether. And so I think it's important for us to identify the properties that have to be R2 now, so that, because our sewer general plan is being updated as we speak. And I think the assumptions for development in those areas will reflect the potential for some middle housing development. I still don't think you're going to see a ton of middle housing occurring because of this bill, but you might see some, and it may be a 5 or a 10% difference in development assumption. And it's just important that we recognize that in our modeling. It will probably help us identify a handful of pipes that maybe are 10 inches that need to be 12. It's going to help us identify sizing for future lift stations or pump replacement projects. And so as long as we have the right assumptions when we do our general sewer plan, it's not going to be a problem. Ultimately, the sewer plant has capacity for, you know, for the 20-year future isn't going to be a problem. Maybe in 30 to 40 years, it starts to become a problem in terms of sewer treatment plant capacity. But for our planning horizon today, I don't think it makes a huge amount of difference, except where we may need to upsize some pipes or lift stations.
Yeah, and I would understand that, except we both had a meeting yesterday, obviously, with West Sound. And, you know, they're concerned about what they're going to see for throughput coming through. As you mentioned, yes, the real concern in neighborhoods was, you know, what do you retrofit for pipe, you know, have to go dig up for retrofitting of piping. But they're also worried about throughput, especially with the numbers that you had given us on growth over the next, you know, projected growth, you know, within the next 5 to 10 years.
Understood.
There's not an easy answer.
Yeah, there's not. And sorry, I've got dogs howling in the background here at my parents' house. So
That's fine. Is there anything, I have one quick question for the good of the order. Is there anything else that anybody wants to bring up at this point in time?
No.
Okay, so my question real quick is the planning commission, my understanding is that Becca Ashby unfortunately had to resign. Who's the new chair?
we did not have, we only had 4 planning commissioners show up at the last meeting. And so we wanted to wait for everyone to show up to figure out the chair and co-chair. So
Okay.
we do not have a chair yet. I believe we have a vice chair incumbent. Is that Tyler or who is that?
It's Tyler, yes.
So
Okay.
we're looking for an appointment to chair the planning commission, and we will be recruiting for planning commissioners here in the near future.
Thanks for another fire hose meeting. Anybody else for the good of the order?
Good work, DCD.
All right,
Yeah,
thanks.
good stuff.
All right.
Thanks, guys.
Good night, everybody.
All right.